On September 2, 2025, the United States strikes a Venezuelan boat carrying 11 people. Trump alleges that the boat was on its way to supply narcotics in the US, and the people on board were drug cartel members. Tensions are rising as the US military continues to deploy along the Caribbean Sea, ready to attack Venezuela. Which begs the question, why is a country with the largest oil reserves in the world on the military radar of the United States? And if it's sitting on so much wealth, why is Venezuela facing one of the worst social crises in the world today?
The devil is right at home. The devil himself is right in the house. And the devil came here yesterday.
In September 2006, Hugo Chavez shocked the world with his fiery anti-US speeches at the UN. But before we understand why Venezuela and the United States are at loggerheads, let's go further back in time. In the 1600s, Venezuela was part of the Spanish Empire. Spain's monarchs ruled with tight control. By 1749, Enlightenment ideas and revolts had taken strong hold and sowed early seeds of independence. When Napoleon invaded Spain in 1810, the local elites saw a window, and by 1821, Venezuela was an independent country. A century later, the entire fate of the country would change. Venezuela discovered their first oil fields. In 1922, they discovered one so large that when they drilled inside it, oil gushed out, reaching a height of 60 meters. It took them 9 days just to contain it. Foreign oil companies rushed to the country, and soon Venezuela became the largest oil exporter in the world. 3 decades later, in 1954, Hugo Chavez was born to a lower middle-class family in rural Venezuela. His parents were school teachers, but they never had enough money. This nurtured his belief that Venezuela's wealth and oil were stolen by elites and foreign powers. At 17, he joined the Venezuelan Military Academy, where he was exposed to radical political thought. He began to blame the US for poverty and inequality in Latin America. Chavez saw the US as the modern version of colonial Spain and would refer to them as the imperialist, an empire that sought to dominate Latin America economically, politically, and militarily.
Hago responsable de todo esto y lo que pueda ocurrir al gobierno de Estados Unidos.
Despite his anti-US rhetoric, Venezuela remained one of the largest oil suppliers to the US for much of his rule. Chavez used the money coming in from the US for his socialist policies at home. To him, oil was a weapon against US hegemony, and he would praise, ally with, and subsidize any country that would go against the US. He also supported leftist movements in Latin America. The United States humored him as a nuisance. Prior to 2013, the US was heavily dependent on Venezuelan oil. At its peak, Venezuela exported 1.5 to 1.7 million barrels per day to the US. That made Venezuela a major pillar of US energy security. But there was one problem. 90% of Venezuela's export earnings were from oil. The oil boom in the 1920s had virtually killed all other industries, especially agriculture, which would soon haunt them for years to come. Chavez funded social programs with oil money. He even nationalized foreign oil assets, seized private firms, and imposed strict currency and price controls. His economic strategies turned out to be unproductive in the long run, since with such heavy reliance on a single commodity, even the smallest changes in oil prices can have huge implications, and everything can come crashing down. By 2010, economic actions taken by Chavez's government during the last decade, such as overspending and price controls, became unsustainable. His successor, Nicolás Maduro, followed in his footsteps. Venezuela's economy faltered while poverty, inflation, and shortages were rising. By 2014, the U.S. shale oil boom had made the U.S. far less dependent on Venezuelan oil. OPEC refused to cut supply, and oil demand from China was slowing. oil prices continued to fall, and Venezuela's economy tumbled. The country faced one of the largest social crises the world had ever seen. Stores were empty. Medicines were not to be found on shelves. More than 70% of Venezuela's food was imported. The country could no longer afford food and medicine. This led to protests across the country. The US had been keenly tracking developments in the region. The Obama administration accused the Venezuelan government under Nicolás Maduro of using violence and repression against peaceful protesters. Maduro meanwhile doubled down on his alliances with US rivals Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba, which raised further concerns in Washington beyond what Chavez had triggered during his rule. Venezuela became a geopolitical outpost for US rivals in the Western Hemisphere. President Barack Obama signed an executive order on March 9, 2015, authorizing sanctions against Venezuela. By 2017, Venezuela was in hyperinflation, economic collapse, and political turmoil. In March 2017, Venezuela's Supreme Court stripped the opposition-controlled National Assembly of its legislative powers. The US and much of Latin America called this a coup by stealth, an attempt at replacing democracy with authoritarian rule. This was during Donald Trump's first presidency. On August 24, 2017, Trump signed an executive order to cut Venezuela off from US financial markets. Maduro was re-elected in 2018. On January 23, 2019, opposition leader Juan Guaidó declared himself interim president, claiming Maduro's 2018 re-election was fraudulent. The US and 50 other countries recognized Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Maduro responded on live TV, "I am the constitutional president. I will not allow imperialist intervention. This is a coup attempt led by the United States." All diplomatic relations with the United States were severed, and US diplomats were given 72 hours to leave the country. By January 28, Trump imposed full oil sanctions on PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil and natural gas company, the country's backbone. Oil exports collapsed overnight. Crude production fell from 1.2 million barrels per day to under 400,000. The humanitarian crisis deepened and GDP shrank by over 60%. Washington believed cutting off oil revenue would lead to a regime collapse. Instead, it hardened Maduro's survival instincts and pushed him deeper into Russia and Iran's orbit. Maduro adapted by selling oil through intermediaries, Russia's Rosneft, Mexican traders, and Iranian tankers. In 2020, Trump doubled down with secondary sanctions, this time punishing non-US companies that traded with PDVSA. The Russian company Rosneft Trading, one of PDVSA's key oil intermediaries, was sanctioned, forcing it to exit Venezuela. Venezuela's oil exports dropped to 70-year lows. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 reshaped energy geopolitics. The US under President Joe Biden sought alternative oil sources amid sanctions on Moscow. Washington quietly opened back channels with Caracas. Chevron received a limited US license to resume operations, marking partial sanctions relief. By 2025, Venezuela was exporting close to 1 million barrels a day, with 84% estimated to be sent to China, often via intermediaries to circumvent US sanctions. In 2025, Donald Trump begins his second term as US president. On February 26th, Trump publicly announced the revocation of the Chevron license, saying he was reversing the concessions given under Biden. He also signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on goods from any country that imports Venezuelan oil directly or indirectly. In recent months, the U.S. indictments against Maduro accuse him of running a narco-terrorism conspiracy with Colombian groups like the FARC. Venezuelan gangs have been designated as terrorist outfits by Trump, giving him legal right to attack. This framing connects to Trump's narrative on law and order, border security, and fentanyl crises inside the U.S. To Washington, this is a war on narco-terrorism. To Maduro, this is a disguised regime change war. In reality, it can be both, and maybe not something as simplistic as just cocaine boats. What do you guys think? Do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like such videos and want us to create more, do subscribe and support the channel.